How can God punish all of Egypt for the decisions of Pharaoh? This is a troubling biblical and ethical question I've asked, and I know a lot of people ask about this passage as well. You teach Old Testament, Talbot School of Theology, friend and colleague of mine working on a commentary on Exodus, so you've thought about this. Before you give me your take on this passage, Dr. Charlie Trimm, will you read the passage for us so we understand what's at stake?
Sure, I'll be reading Exodus 7, verse 4. Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment.
Yeah, so that sounds kind of messed up in our understanding today. So Pharaoh, the individual, won't listen. So I'm going to bring my hand of judgment on all of Egypt because of it. I thought we're supposed to judge people, in a sense, for their own crimes individually. Now, before we get into it, what's some of the context going on here in one of the most famous passages, arguably, in all the Bible? But remind us.
So the context here in Exodus is that a previous Pharaoh has enslaved the Israelites, and they have been enslaved ever since then. And God is sending Moses back to Egypt to say to Pharaoh, let my people go, so that God's promises to Abraham can be fulfilled and the people of Israel can go to the land of Canaan.
Okay, so some of the historical context this time. The Pharaoh, and you can obviously fill this in. Who is the Pharaoh, and why is his power so significant kind of in the culture at that time?
So Pharaoh is a divine office in Egypt. So Egyptians recognize Pharaoh as a human, but in their mythology, when a human took the office of Pharaoh, they were viewed as a god. And this makes him obviously very powerful in ancient Egypt. And he is the representative of the Egyptian pantheon to the people. So if you want to interact with the gods, the primary way to do that is through Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh is a really important figure in Egyptian thought at this time period.
Okay, so with some of the context going on here that people need to understand is that this isn't just like Pharaoh versus Moses. This is the God of Moses and Pharaoh, who is the God of Egypt. This is like a divine battle taking place, is the lens through which they view it. Do you agree with that? Would you add anything to that? How does that help us make sense of this passage?
Yeah, so later on in Exodus 12, it says that God passes judgment on the Egyptian gods. And so some people think we can correlate a particular attack or plague with an Egyptian deity. But I think what the primary point is there is it's an attack on Pharaoh, who is representing the Egyptian pantheon. And in particular, I think what's happening is there's a responsibility of Pharaoh to keep what's called ma'at. So ma'at is order. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. And so the Egyptian pharaohs, one of their main goals is to bring ma'at throughout the world. And so they might conquer other places because they're in chaos. I'm going to go bring ma'at to them so that the world can be a better place. And so what God is doing here is showing Pharaoh, even in your own country, you can't keep ma'at. And so these attacks against Pharaoh have effects on all these places, but it's because primarily it's to show Pharaoh, you can't keep ma'at even in your own country, and Yahweh's more powerful than Pharaoh.
That's so interesting. We see battles like this nation versus that nation, power struggle. In their mind, it was like a divine power struggle. And in some ways, you would know which God was real by the victory in the battle itself. That was the assumption that people brought. Now, are there some different ways that scholars will try to make sense of this ethical question, how all the people can be judged for just the sins and rebellion of Pharaoh?
Yeah, so there's clearly the negative reading, which would just condemn God for this. So as you were saying in the beginning, if you read this through very individual eyes, it seems very unfair that God would do this to the Egyptians. But I think there's a variety of lines of reasoning that help us see what God is doing and how it's just. So as I was mentioning, these attacks on Pharaoh are to show he can't keep ma'at. So that's the primary context of what's going on here. And in ancient times in general, they have a communal kind of attitude. So the leader represents the people, and if the leader does something well, all the people are blessed. So we have this all the time in Egyptian culture. When a king goes to defeat an enemy and brings back lots of plunder, it's not unjust for the people to then celebrate by keeping some of this plunder and getting richer and so on. And so on the other side, if a king goes to battle and they lose, then they all feel the effect of that. And so this is a communal way of living life throughout much of human history. That's been the way it's practiced, and certainly in ancient Egypt as well.
That makes total sense to me. One of my questions would be is, do we have any sense of how the people would have viewed this? And I know a lot of the writings are from the elite and the priests. We don't have the common writing like even blogs or books by people. But as far as we know, is there a sense that they would look at this and go, well, this is our God, this is our team. Pharaoh represents us. And if he does great, we win. If he does bad, there's something on us. And they saw themselves corporately. And if so, that means we're kind of reading into an apparent injustice here that at the time, arguably they wouldn't have felt. Is that fair? Do you agree with that? Would you nuance that at all?
In ancient times, especially in the ancient Near East, you didn't really have battles between gods. So what would normally happen is if one nation conquers another nation, it would be viewed as the god of the defeated nation was on your side now. So it's not that my god beat up your god.
Oh,
it's that
interesting.
the enemy god decided his own people weren't doing a good job serving him anymore, and he's now going to be on the victor's side. And so you have very little language about one god being greater than another god. So in the Egyptian context, they would delight to bring in more gods. And so they would bring in, say, Canaanite deities and so on. So I think ideally what the Egyptian would want is, yeah, we're fine with Yahweh as long as he's part of our pantheon and kind of serves Amun and doesn't make a big deal about himself. But we'd be fine serving him amongst other gods. But what Yahweh does here, he says, no, that's not the way it's going to be. I am the supreme God. I am greater than all these other gods. And that's where the issue of this battle comes up between the two. And so for the perspective of the average Egyptian, as you say, we're not entirely sure because we don't have records of what the common people would have thought for the most part. But I think in general, they probably would have bought into much of Egyptian mythology and how they would have viewed the world and so on.
That's helpful. Okay, so sum it up for me. I've been asked questions like this. Somebody goes, here's Pharaoh. He's a leader. All these people get these plagues, which may or may not be the best translation. Tell us if you view that differently. But they get judged, and there's pain for them because of one guy. How is that just? Your answer would be, go.
So to refer to the translation issue, I prefer the translation attack rather than plague.
Okay.
And the reason for this is our word plague in English actually used to mean attack. And so that's where the 10 plagues come from, is 10 attacks. And in Hebrew and other translations, this is the word is attack. But what has happened in English is the word plague, the meaning has gotten more specific over time. So disease used to be an attack of the gods. And so that's why plague got to be specifically for a disease only. So I prefer attack. I think it's a better translation of the Hebrew words used, and it gets at the idea of what God is doing here. He's the divine warrior, and so on. So in response to the ethical question, I would say it's partially the communal judgment, but I would also say there's enough hints in the Exodus account that the Egyptians are mostly on board with Pharaoh. So the magicians, I think, are a clear example of that. They are supporting Pharaoh. And they are supporting Pharaoh to the extent that they make life worse for the Egyptians. So instead of, say, removing the frogs, they bring more frogs. And so we see this sense of irony where they're demonstrating their power and showing the ridiculous nature of Pharaoh by making worse life for the Egyptians. And there's a few other hints of the servants of Pharaoh, who are the elite, most likely. They are supporting Pharaoh in this as well. Now, there are some hints of Egyptians who are opposed to Pharaoh a little bit and want to serve God, maybe. But they're small hints. In Exodus 12, we do have reference to a mixed multitude leaving Egypt, which probably contains some Egyptians who are saying, Pharaoh, enough of you, like we're going to head out. But those are just small hints. I think overall, probably the Egyptians are on board with Pharaoh.
So why does this take matter? Why is it important we understand this about kind of this divine struggle that's taking place in this passage, exemplified again by God judging all of Egypt with these attacks for what Pharaoh did?
I think there's two primary reasons. One is to demonstrate Yahweh is more powerful than any other god. So Pharaoh is the most powerful man on earth at this time. And God is demonstrating, I am more powerful than all the Egyptian gods, than this Pharaoh deity who channels all the Egyptian gods. I am more powerful than him. But the second point is he is using that power, not just for sheer power, but to demonstrate that I am going to keep my promise to my people. And so he is bringing Israel out of Egypt to the land of Canaan because he promised to Abraham. And so that's the encouragement to us who follow God today, not only do we serve a really powerful God, but he is one who keeps his promises and uses his power because he loves his people and keeps his promises.
I love that. You started with what does this reveal in the passage itself about what God is doing? What does it reveal about God's promises? And then how does it apply to us? Good biblical exegesis, the kind we teach here at Talbot. Looking forward to your commentary coming out. And folks watching, if you want a deeper dive on some of these issues, we've probably been talking about this, a dozen minutes or so. Let us know. Comment what other questions you have, and we'll have you back to explore some more passages. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Want to learn the Bible for yourself? Logos is the library I use every day in my personal life. I start every morning with a physical Bible out and Logos open next to me on my computer, along with a cup of coffee. It is everything you need to go deep and unlock the truth of Scripture and apply it to your life. Check out a free 60-day trial at logos.com/McDowell. Link is in the description.